Hello everyone, and welcome back to For Fun and Profit. My name is Basilisk, and I am still your host, so let's get started. As you might have gathered from my less than amused tone last episode, or at the end of last episode, I have a bit of an issue with today's topic. Today, we're finally going to talk about my favorite game series, and while I'd love to tell you about something great the Fire Emblem games do, today we're instead going to be looking at one of the more egregious writing gaffes in the series' history. However, before we can talk about the Deep Realms, we need to set the stage. Problems of this nature and this severity don't just happen spontaneously, after all. So let's wind the clock back all the way back to the days of the Super Nintendo. Fire Emblem wouldn't be translated into English for quite a few more years, but the series was going strong in its native Japan. So for the fourth entry in the series, they decided to do something new and unique. The resulting game, Genealogy of the Holy War, is something of an oddball in the series even to this day, and most of its unique gameplay has yet to return. Most of it is also irrelevant to this video, but there is one element we'll be talking about. You see, Genealogy of the Holy War was the first game to allow members of the player's army to get married and have children. This was, so far as I'm aware, completely unique at the time. Even today, it's rare among strategy RPGs, although Grand Strategy does do it more often. However, what really made the children in Genealogy of the Holy War interesting, and risky from a game design standpoint, was how they were implemented. Halfway through the game, almost your entire playable army gets wiped out, with only a few survivors, even fewer of whom can be regained. After this devastation, the game jumps forward 2 decades, picking up the story from the perspective of your party's children. Or if certain children didn't get born because the player didn't get their mother married, some random yahoos that are suspiciously similar, but almost universally inferior to the potential children. The rest of the game is played with this second generation, and who got married to who decides the children's stats, abilities, and even some of their equipment. It was a gutsy move, killing off half the player's party and then having them go through the rest of the game with the new kids on the block. Honestly, I can't even say if it paid off. Almost every new idea Genealogy of the Holy War had was jettisoned when the 5th entry in the series, Thracia 776, came along. However, this including the second generation units. By the time the series started getting translated with the 7th entry, Blazing Sword, everyone thought they were gone for good. Then came Fire Emblem Awakening, the 11th entry in the series, not counting the remakes. A lot of people at Nintendo thought that Awakening was going to be the last Fire Emblem, so it was envisioned as a sort of greatest hits version of the series, bringing back ideas that hadn't been seen in the franchise for years, such as branching class trees, a world map, monster units, transforming units that were actually good, trainee units, and, surprisingly, second-generation units. However, they were handled differently than the Genealogy. Awakening has a subplot running through it that has to deal with time travel and the children of the first generation coming back to stop the world from getting destroyed by a demon dragon god thing. Now, while there are some issues with how the second generation units were executed in Awakening, that mostly comes down to a bewilderingly handled second act of the main plot, which would take a whole different video to cover. It's a mess. In terms of actual gameplay and story integration, however, the second generation units were handled decently. In Awakening, you can't get any given child unit until their mother gets an S-rank support, or in the case of Chrom and a male Robin, until the father gets an S-rank support, or in the case of Chrom, until the plot dictates Lucina shows up. Once that happens, you unlock an optional level where you can recruit the child unit. Their stats, available classes, and hair color are decided by who the parents are, and if trained properly, they could wind up much stronger than their parents, although doing so took far more patience than should have for when you first get them in the game. Now, some of you are probably very much aware Fire Emblem Awakening sold like crazy, and Nintendo suddenly had a newly minted hit franchise on their hands. So they started working on the next entry in the series, believing it would be an even bigger success than Fire Emblem Awakening. Unfortunately, Fire Emblem Fates is a very rocky game, partly due to how it was handled, and partly due to Nintendo deciding to cram in some of the more popular elements from Awakening, no matter how much they didn't belong in Fates. This, sadly, included the second generation units. So what was the problem with the second generation units in Fates? Well, the long and short of it is that as far as anyone can tell, the decision to include the second generation units was made really late in development. No official statement regarding this has been made, that I'm aware of anyways, but most people cite how the second generation units were integrated into the story of Fates as evidence, or more accurately, how they weren't. See, sorry. See, you can play through the entirety of Fates without getting any of your units married. And if that happens, not only do the second generation units never appear, you never get any indication whatsoever that they even exist. They're completely optional content that has no bearing on the story of the game. Hell, even if you do have the second generation units, the story never acknowledges their presence, despite the theoretical effects a lot of these children should have on the plot. But hey, the second generation units being optional isn't a problem, right? Well, no, not in and of itself. The problem comes from how they're implemented. See, Fates doesn't have the time travel from Awakening, so they had to come up with a reason for the second generation units, all of whom are ostensibly conceived, carried to term, and born during the plot of the game, to get involved in the fighting. Enter the infamous plot device known as the Deep Realms. Oh, merciful God in heaven, the fucking Deep Realms! These things come out of nowhere for the second generation units and are otherwise never mentioned. So how this works, according to Fates, is that they act as a safe place that sorry, I just bumped my mic. Is that they act as a safe place that can't be invaded, where time moves much faster than in the real world. Meaning that, relative to the main plot, the children grow to adults in a matter of months, if not weeks. Which, aside from being pulled right from the writer's ass, is problematic in its own right. First off, the main characters theoretically already have access to their own pocket dimension safe from the war that serves as the main plot of Fates, right? Yeah, the castle. Your own little pocket castle with food, bathhouses, barracks, water, arena, prisons, libraries, and literally everything else you could possibly ask for. That's a perfect place to raise a kid, right? Oh, wait, no, because the plot of Fate never once acknowledges that this thing exists. As far as... it's basically the world's most unnecessarily elaborate menu screen as far as the plot of Fates is concerned. Okay, issue 2. Remember that bit about how the Deep Realms are completely safe and can't be invaded? Yeah, half the recruitment chapters for the second generation units involve that unit's Deep Realm getting invaded, including one occasion where the unit is summoning zombies. So much for safe, yeah? Finally, issue 3, and some of you probably figured this one out as soon as I finished explaining what the Deep Realms are. Doesn't dumping your children in pocket dimension and leaving them for what are, to them, months or possibly years at a time, and only letting them out when they come of fighting age and prove themselves capable of serving on the battlefield, come with massively problematic connotations and implications for the mental state of these characters? Yes it does. Every single second generation unit shows serious abandonment issues, behavioral traits that indicate a deep-seated need for parental approval, actions that are easily interpreted as desperate cries for help, or some combination of the three, and sorry I just bumped the mic again. This is really not helped by the fact that the character most players will get married off first, and therefore the first parent to throw their kid into a deep realm, holy shit, is Corrin, the main character of Fates. For those not in the know, Corrin's backstory is basically that they were kidnapped as a child and locked in a castle in the middle of fucking nowhere and only let out when they were of fighting age and had proved they were capable of serving on the battlefield, among other things. So, yeah, now we've got the main character subjecting their own child to part of the same terrible upbringing they themselves were put through. Brilliant! Now, to be fair, the writers do seem to be aware of the issues the Deep Realms caused. A lot of the troubled behavior the second generation units exhibit is addressed, especially the abandonment issues. But the way that's handled is limited by a different mechanic that limits the number of conversations any two units can engage in outside of the main plot to 3. Another positive is that most of the second generation units are fairly well written, and none of their issues or behaviors is them being whiny or simply needing to get over it. Finally, the game does call out the absentee and neglectful parenting for the problem-causing badness that it is, even with the characters who are otherwise depicted as some of the better parents of the group. But the issue still remains. The Deep Realms are a blatant attempt to shoehorn the second generation units into the game, and one that was decided on, or more likely forced onto the development team from higher up, due to the popularity of the second generation units in Awakening. This change came too late to be included in the main plot, causing some issues with the game, ignoring that half the cast can potentially have gotten pregnant during the course of a massive war, and causing deeply problematic issues with the parts of the game that do acknowledge the second generation's existence, turning the game's heroes into some of the worst parents in gaming. So why are we talking about this? Well, the Deep Realms serve as a masterclass in what happens when mechanics and story obligation are shoehorned into a game in order to pander to what the publisher thinks people want from the series. The second generation units, and by extension the Deep Realms, are only in Fates because people liked Awakening and Nintendo thought people would want the second generation units back. And truth be told, it is possible that people did want them back. I don't remember there being any big negative outcry when people first learned that Fates had second generation units. That didn't come until the game was released and people saw how they were implemented. However, the effect this shoddy implementation had on the series and its player base was pretty clear. Even if people had wanted second generation units back before Fates, they certainly didn't want them back afterwards. When Three Houses, the next major entry in the series that wasn't a remake, announced that the second generation units wouldn't be returning, the reaction was pretty much met with unanimous praise. The reaction pretty much was unanimous praise. Fates and the Deep Realms had killed the player's base's enthusiasm for the mechanic. It is important to remember that no matter how popular any single entry is in the franchise, or how popular individual elements from a specific game are in a series, no, players don't want shallow copies of those things just for the sake of appealing to the fan base. The heart of a series is always its core, and including things just because it was popular that one time without giving it proper thought will only ever hurt that core, as was the case with Fates. Thank you all so much for watching, and if you have a game design topic you would like me to cover, please let me know. I haven't decided on what the next episode will be yet, and while I don't guarantee that I'll talk about every suggestion that's sent to me, who knows? I like getting suggestions, and one of them may just awaken a burning need to talk about it. In the meantime, this has been Basilisk, and I will see you all in the next episode. Thank you, and good night, folks.